Oh, goodness. We are doing it like it is 2013, folks. I got my phone not propped up against my wallet like I did for the muscle and strength pyramid videos, but propped up against my laptop at the very least. And I've got a mic. So we're moving on up. This is 2023 professional vlogger quality minus professionalism. So yeah, folks, it's been a long time since I've been on the YouTubes. My apologies. For those who've been hanging around for a long time, you remember seeing my face on my own regular series that weren't connected to the rest of 3DMJ back in the day. You know, my anecdote series, my Say What series, and my multiple other things that I've done over the years, but those have fallen off drastically as I've gotten more busy. And fortunately, it is only the YouTube lives and the podcasts and the course snippets that actually keep my face on YouTube. I am notoriously bad at being on here regularly, but that's going to change this year because I am prepping and I've committed to doing a 2023 contest prep bodybuilding vlog, folks. I'm excited about it, and no, absolutely not. It won't be weekly because I am not Jeff. I'm not Alberto. Those guys are good. I'm terrible compared to them. I am going to commit to doing big picture updates. So this first vlog is going to be about my overall contest prep season plan, the initial phase of what I'm doing, how I'm working with Berto, how I'm managing things on my own as well a bit. And basically going to go over my training split and my setup at this early stage in prep. This is going to be a big year for me. So I've got a lot going on. I don't just mean that in terms of this contest season. I mean it in terms of just everything I got going on. For those who follow our Iron Culture podcast, Omar and I have dropped hints about filming an Iron Culture documentary, and that's something we're working on, and that's going to involve a whole lot of travel. In addition to that, I'm going to be coaching at the Sheffield, at the IPF Worlds, and I'm going to be basically just traveling almost every single month except for the months of May, August, and December. And let me tell you, when I live in New Zealand, which I do, everywhere is a long flight. But yeah, a lot going on. And I've got multiple PhD students graduating. I'm working on the third edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramids. I still have my regular mass commitments. So to say I've got a lot on is probably an understatement, but I'm going to try to keep it all balanced. And part of that is me not vlogging every week and editing videos and doing all that. So first off, the purpose of this first video is talking about my overall prep setup. The game plan is to compete in the months of September, October, and November. Tentative contest prep schedule that I am for sure on is WNBF Australia. I think that's the end of October. WNBF New Zealand, which will probably be in September. I don't think they have the final date announced. And then also in October, but before the Australia show, if I recall correctly, there's a Pro-Am in Washington, a WNBF INBF Pro-Am that I'm going to do with Jeff Alberts. And then finally, we have the WNBF Worlds in November in Seattle. So I'll be traveling a fair bit. I might sneak in another show, but we shall see. So right now, starting prep, right now as I record this, I think I'm 10 or 11 days into prep. The footage I took is all in my first week of training. So my physique update that you're going to see is after like 4 or 5 days of dieting or something like that. That's essentially the beginning. So I started my first weigh-in at 96 kilos, and I have now hit a low of 93.1. So I lost a whole lot of bloat, like kind of right off the bat. And in the first week, it was just a little lighter than that. I think my lowest low was like 93.7 or something like that. The goal is when I go present in Mexico for the IAFF with Alberto Nunez, which I'm really looking forward to be just at or under 90 kilos, or just at or under 200 pounds. See, through your bone, Americans. And that is the point at which Berto's going to take a little closer hold of the reins. So at this stage, my nutrition plan, I don't have target macros. I don't have target calories. I'm not hitting a goal step count. I'm not really tracking or monitoring anything because I have a really solid set of established behavioral patterns. I'm always consuming a sufficient amount of protein. I have a pretty set up meal schedule. I eat breakfast, I eat lunch, I have a post-workout shake, I have dinner, and then I typically have I almost always have a Greek yogurt before bed. So I have like 5 protein feedings. I know roughly my energy intake, and my meals don't change very much. I'm very boring as a person. is what I'm getting at. So what I've done to simply get into this caloric deficit is I've modified the qualitative aspects of my food to reduce calories. So for example, for breakfast, I'm typically doing something that involves not just a couple protein sources, but also a fair amount of carbohydrate and fat sources. An example might be eggs Benedict, the poached eggs, and smoked salmon. So now, instead of that, I'm just doing eggs on toast, a couple of poached eggs, and then I'll get an extra poached egg to make up for the loss of everything else. And that's pretty much it. I might get a side of spinach or mushrooms or tomatoes, and that's a pretty substantial cut in calories. My lunch has basically stayed exactly the same, and this is I eat it in season, off season, it doesn't matter. It's a can of tuna, a Nothing Naughty protein bar, which is kind of similar to a Quest bar, but it's got fewer ingredients and slightly less grams of protein and fat. And then I'll have 2 pieces of fruit and a carrot. And then my post-workout shake, it's creatine, whey protein, that's it. And then for dinner, it changes. We cook most nights. Sometimes we get takeaway. And what we're doing is just removing all the very high-calorie takeaway items, like we're not doing pizza. We're not doing Indian. We're not doing things like that. And instead, we're just choosing just lower calorie items. So Southeast Asian foods, fish and chips that are not breaded, for example, and just ordering less total chips, and other things like that. And then when we cook, just making simple swaps. So we often make like fake meat burgers, like we'll do Beyond Meat or an Impossible Burger, and I'll have like a layer of feta pretty thick on the bottom, and then we'll have cheese, burger buns, burger, and then a sweet potato that we split between us. So what I've done is I've replaced the feta with light Laughing Cow, and we've replaced the baked potato with broccoli. And that's basically all I've done. And then finally, the Greek yogurt that I had before bed, I've shifted from something that has some fat and some carbs to something that is basically just plain protein, and I just add sweetener to make it taste better. So that has resulted in some pretty substantial weight loss right off the bat. Some of it is just losing the bloat, like I said. But yeah, I've then settled on a pretty steady weight loss, which is, I think, right on target. I barely even notice it. Once I start to get in the 94, 95 kilo range or higher, I don't have an appetite, and I'm ready to start losing weight. The one difference this year compared to 2019, the last time I prepped, which really, that was 4 years ago, but it seems like it was just yesterday. That's probably because of the COVID time vortex. I started that prep at right around 89, 90 kilos. So I was actually already pretty lean, and that was nice. Every time I lost anything on the scale, I could see it visually, and I was in a really good position to start, and I was able to actually do my first show in April, starting dieting in December. So this year, you may notice it is already February. I'm starting my diet, and I started 6 kilograms or 13 pounds heavier than the last time, which is why I'm not going to be competing until September. So I have plenty of runway, plenty of time. If it does start to beat me up, especially if I'm not even close to getting in really good shape, we'll pull a diet break, take a break, not gain weight, of course, but just get back to maintenance, try to get my head above water, catch a breath, and then dive back under. But I know how long it takes me to get shredded, and this should be good to go. I should absolutely be peeled by September and be able to hold that condition in that short time window. I wanted to focus my shows all crunched together towards the end of the season because I want to do Worlds. I've never done WNBF Worlds before, and for me, that is going to be that's kind of like the pinnacle. My career goal as a natural bodybuilder is to first earn my WNBF Pro card, and then compete as a pro at Worlds. I can compete I'll probably be able to compete at WNBF Worlds as an amateur, assuming I place in I think the top 3 or the top 2, depending on the size of the show in an amateur division. I've done that numerous times in my career. The number of times I've placed second, we're not going to talk about it right now. But nonetheless, competing as an amateur is definitely going to be on, in the cards. And if I'm able to get my pro card, competing as a pro would be a huge life goal of mine, to go basically get pictures as you get dunked on by Jordan, because I don't think I'm yet at the stage, and may never get to the point where I'm competitive at the pro level, but I really do want to put myself up against the pros, have a really good, prep, and see how I do. All right, folks. So the first thing I want to discuss is that I am doing some cardio. The last and latest addition we got to our home gym was a rower, and very simple. The way I'm implementing this is on days I'm not able to get in a couple walks. What I do is I simply do 5 minutes pre and post before I do my training. On days where I am able to get my walks, I get in 5 minutes pre and no post. So it's really low volume. Now, with that said, let's talk about the actual training split, which you can see is just popped up on the screen with me rowing away in the background to keep things exciting, which I know is not exciting. But basic setup, I've got 5 days, full body in quotes, which just means I don't have any restrictions on what I train on each day. And I have powerlifting movements at a minimum effective dose for what I think will increase my strength at this relatively detrained powerlifting state, interspersed because I would like to actually compete now that I'm turning 40 and dieting in the M183 class, because I think I could do decently well at the regional, maybe even national level here in New Zealand. Very simple way I'm implementing that. 3 days per week. I am working up to a single once each on the squat, bench, and deadlift. That single is anywhere between, say, like a 7 to 9.5, maybe even 10 RPE as we move later. So that's close to a max. So it's kind of a training max. And then I do 2 sets of 3 at 80% of that single. Everything else is bodybuilding specific, and I'm just doing 3 sets per exercise, and we're going to go through each one of my days in sequential order of what I do so you can see how I perform exercises and the general setup. So kicking off day 1 with a squat single at 190 kilos, which I thought moved pretty well before I then got into lat pull downs. I figured you didn't want to see 2 sets of 3 at 80% because they move pretty well. They're like a 5 to a 7 RPE, nothing too crazy. The lat pull downs I'm doing here, I have to add a bunch of weight if I only use one cable because the cables aren't that heavy on my home equipment. So I've actually got 2 20-kilo plates and then 2 2.5-kilo plates stacked on there. You'll notice I didn't talk much about the rep ranges I'm using initially, and that's because I tend to use a rep range that is relatively broad, like in the 8 to 20 rep range sometimes, depending on the exercise. So I typically am training compound lifts often in like the 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 rep range, while things like cable crossovers, which you can see here, or lat pull downs, I'll keep in higher repetition ranges. And I'll just, on a week-to-week basis, I'll auto-regulate based upon how my joints are feeling and what level of progress I think I can make, and whether I would just prefer to try to add reps or add load. It's not completely haphazard by any means. Generally, movements that are single joint, I keep lighter and do higher reps. Exercises that are multi-joint, especially lower body exercises, I tend to go a little heavier. But based upon the research and everything that I've seen, I'm relatively convinced that there's a benefit to training in a broader repetition range. So here is one of the calf variations I do, where I just do a single leg bodyweight calf raise while I strap up and hold a dumbbell. I find this is a pretty good variation, but it's one of many. I don't do any seated calf raises. I don't have A, the machine, and B, I don't think you really need to do that to try to quote unquote isolate the soleus by making the gastroc less active. They both perform, plantar flexion. So I just do standing, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on much. And we shall see, based upon the preliminary analysis, which is not done yet, apologies, on the stretching protocol, whether I'll start implementing stretching during prep as well. But right now, I'm just doing stretching throughout the week. Here you can see the start of day 2, where I do seal rows. I have to kind of jury rig this. You can see that I've created some stacked blocks based on the stuff I have, foot blocks, an aerobic block, 25 kilo plates, and then I'm doing these. And then I have to use small circumference plates to get the actual row through. And then I superset that, I should say, probably an antagonist paired set with, this is like a medium grip bench press. So I don't do like a close grip. It's just a medium grip, just about shoulder width. And this is like one of my accessories for the bench press, as well as a good chest building exercise. I really like closer grip bench presses as they create a larger range of motion, a little more stretch. And I think they're also great for the triceps. On top of that, on this day, I do standing leg extensions, which for anyone who has access to a cable stack, this is a great way to train the quads at a longer muscle length. So all you have to do is just set the cable up slightly above hip height, put a cuff on, and as you saw, you attach it to the back of your ankle, and then you can start leg extending away. And because you're not in a seated position, that rec fem is in a slightly longer position. And I noticed the first time I started doing these that I got really sore mid-quad in a way that I didn't normally on regular leg extensions. And I actually prefer it to seated leg extensions, which are too painful for me, maybe because they cut off blood flow, not sure. Another one I really like for training at a longer muscle length is behind the back lateral raises, which I've set up here just to get a little more stretch on the delt, and putting some tension on it at the bottom is the reason why I'm doing it this way, and just elongating that range of motion. Big fan of cable-based delt movements as opposed to dumbbells, where when you're at the bottom, there's really no load on it because it's your arm is in line with gravity and it's a free weight. So just to kind of show you what that looks like, we're turning around, we're getting the booty shot. You can see I'm wearing the Rascal apparel, very, very, very short shorts. But yeah, I'm getting the stretch basically to where my shoulder allows. I'm getting to be able to get my hand basically back to the opposite glute. These I progress in reps, and then I go up and load, and I start at the bottom of the rep range, kind of a double progression. But it's a pretty good movement. So I do more volume on delts, lats, and calves and everything else because I'm trying to bring them up, but I'm not doing a pure specialization cycle like I did during the off season. Then I do a little bit of direct arm work. I will absolutely, for like bicep curls, tricep push downs, and calves, since they're really low complexity single joint movements, I'll switch up what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I just felt like doing the old school seated alternating bicep curls today. So I did. And yeah, next week, or actually I'm recording in the future. The following week I did a different exercise. Sometimes I will just choose based on what I feel like, because I just don't think it matters that much for elbow flexion. One thing you will notice here is these are actually incline curls. So my arm is shifted back across my body. Since the biceps are also a shoulder flexor, although a weak one, and they do attach at the shoulder, when your arm is behind your body like this and you do an incline curl, it creates more tension at the bottom range, and it puts the bicep in a more stretched position. And if you haven't done incline curls before and you're just used to doing, say, preacher curls, you'll probably notice more soreness than normal because you're training at a longer muscle length. And then day 3, we're starting off with a single on bench press. This was 137, or just over 300 pounds, which moved pretty well. I know that kind of flashed on and off quick. I probably should have shown some of my setup just for the length of the recording, but I didn't. So anyway, yeah, singles are going so pretty well to start. A little over 400 pounds on bench for the Americans, a little over 300 on 300 pounds for bench for the Americans, a little over 400, around 420 for squat. Decent start. These and the much misaligned pullover. People think they're a shitty exercise for both the pecs and the lats, but actually they're great because, in my opinion, because they're training you with a high degree of tension right at that long muscle length. And I think as we understand that, we see they do have some role. They're also unique in that they train both the lats and the chest at the same time, because when your arms are in full flexion and the pec is lengthened, it actually assists at the very start of that shoulder extension movement, and they also train the long head of the tricep, so kind of a cool combined exercise that keeps some muscle groups together that normally aren't. This is the other lateral raise variation where I do it in front of my body. On this set I tried to go heavier than I could, which is why there's a little more body English, but I like both variations. I don't necessarily have a preference. I think just try whichever one feels better, and since I train delts almost every day, I just didn't feel like doing the same variation of lateral raise on 2 days in a row. So here's your classic old tricep pushdowns. Nothing much to say about these, to be honest. I like them. I use higher reps generally because lower reps tends to piss off my elbows. And yeah, I just kind of progress on reps and keep the loads relatively light because I try to always keep it, above 10 or 12. Another thing that I haven't talked much about is the proximity to failure that I train with. Since the volume is relatively low per session per muscle group, you'll notice that at the end of my sets, most of the time I am pretty close to failure. A lot of these videos are just on my first set, so they're probably going to be closer to like an 8 RPE or like 2 reps in reserve. But I find because I have a high training frequency, I don't have a lot of DOMs. So the things that make me decide whether or not I'll go closer or further from failure is, am I training at a longer muscle length? Because that'll enhance DOMs. Am I using a novel exercise, which I'm often not, I'm pretty well trained. Am I using a high volume? And then when is the next time I'm going to train the muscle group? And do I have an important strength performance in coming days? And if all of those things align, then I may or may not train close to failure. So as an example here, calf raises, don't really care. I'm pushing that set pretty close to failure. That last one moved pretty slow. And this one, I'm really struggling to get up there and complete the range of motion. So no downside to it because it's not going to affect the next day, which started with a deadlift at a reasonable RPE that was 210 kilos. Now this is pretty cool. The other most recent addition before we got our rower was this convertible dual hack squat / leg press. And I actually found out you can do 4 exercises on this bad boy. It serves as a machine shoulder press, which I've been really enjoying, and it fits my body geometry quite well. You can do a hack squat, you can do a leg press, and you can also do a calf raise on the leg press. So when you've got a home gym and it's just in your garage and you don't have a whole lot of space, this is a great piece of kit because it's, a lot of things all at once. Here's another cool way to adapt a cable machine into something that can do more than you might typically anticipate. I'm trying to mimic a seated leg curl here. That's why I'm bent over at the waist while I'm doing a single leg curl to try to get that stretch position on the hammy. So those are done in much the same way as the standing leg extension. That's a bent over standing leg curl. You just have to elevate your foot, which you don't have to do on the leg extension. These are kind of a hybrid pull-down row. I find it gets a really good stretch on my lat. It takes a little longer because you got to do one arm at a time, but I really like this movement, and it's one of the ones that I think has made somewhat of a difference in my back and created some more width, even visible from the front. All right, here we go. This is the last day. This is day 5. I kick things off with a leg press. You'll notice I'm getting some pretty decent range here. Some of that I attribute to the stretching I've done on my calves. I got a lot more ankle range of motion now. And these are pretty good. I think I do them typically in like the 6 to 10 rep range, and I just build up reps over time. I know it's hard to tell how much is loaded up there, but generally I'm working in the 200 to 250 kilo range. And then I just keep the same weight on there in between sets of leg press. I do calf presses, so calf raises on the leg press, and I'm stronger on calf raise on the leg press than I am on leg press on leg press on the leg press, probably just because of the lever arm. So anyway, I'm typically doing something like 25 to 40% more reps on calves than I can do on leg press. You'll see I'm doing that here. So I train calves 3 different days per week right now, between 3 to 4 sets. And that's kind of what I kick this day off, supersetting, not really supersetting, but alternating between leg press and calf raise. And then from there, I believe I move on to weighted dips. This is another assistance movement for bench press / chest exercise. I typically train with between 20 to 30 kilos attached to my waist. This is a great attachment. It really expands what you can do. That thing I'm on right there, it can be a squat rack. It can be it's a dual cable raise, and it's also got pull-ups and weight belt attachments for dips. And as you can see here, you can also just sit, and I've just set up a stool so that I can do cable rows. Same kind of thing here. You have to, if you're using 1 cable versus 2, you got to really add some weights to the stack to make sure that the weight's heavy enough. So these tend to be relatively high rep, that kind of the 12 to 15 rep range, because I have to add a bunch of weight to make that heavy enough. And I could go heavier, but when I need to, I just do single arm. You'll notice I'm staying pretty lean forward to try to get a little more stretch on the lats. And also, I'm going, even though I've lost a little bit of range of motion. These last couple reps, you see I haven't touched my chest. And I used to not do that, but now that I've understood that the importance of full range of motion is training at longer muscle lengths, I allow myself to get about 2/3 to 75% of that range of motion before I call it quits. Now you're probably wondering, why the hell am I lying down while I do this? So these are just regular old rope curls, but I just lie down when I do them because I find it just helps me focus on the muscle better. And since I'm not in a commercial gym, no one's there to laugh at me and think it's strange. And then I decided to put it on YouTube, and now I'm embarrassed. But essentially, the reason why I do that is just because I find curls take more out of me than I would expect. And I just want to focus on getting a really good pump in the muscle, training it, and maintaining good form, not bending at the knees, etc. And lying down helps me do that. Now, the reason why this video is extending so long is I actually just did a rest pause set here. And I do that on single joint movements from time to time because it saves time. And I think it's just as effective. Not great to do on compound, especially lower body exercises, because it creates so much cardiovascular fatigue that I think it limits performance, and you don't actually get to stimulate the muscle that you're trying to train. But here I just did one kind of quote unquote activation set, pretty close to failure. And then I just adjust my grip because my hands slowly slide up the rope, and then it hurts my thumb because I'm a little baby. And it gives me time between sets to just adjust back down, catch my breath, and then get back into each next rest pause set. So I'm trying to get at least 4 or 5 reps on these rest pauses after an initial set, closer to 10. And that's the kind of loading that I'll choose. Another reason that I choose the rope curl and a neutral grip here is that if I do a whole lot of supinated curls, it starts to give me elbow tendonitis, kind of the same reason I choose the tricep push downs in the higher rep range. So anyway, I think this is the last set. I push it all the way to failure because it's a bicep curl. And then you get to actually see my physique. So this I took it's either 3 or 4 days into dieting. And I'm probably at like a legitimate 20% body fat here. My body weight is like 94 kilos here. My competition weight's around 80 kilos. And if you do the math, and if you've seen how lean I get in competition, it kind of makes sense that I'm around 20% here with this level of definition. I think sometimes people over or underestimate their body fat. They typically underestimate it the first time they compete, and then afterwards, and they see how much weight that other bodybuilders lose, especially natural bodybuilders, then they start underestimating it. But I think this is about 20%. And I had to say, I was almost embarrassed to put this up, and then I saw it, and I was like, that ain't half bad. Like, obviously, I'm not in shape, but I'm where I should be at the start of a season where I'm going to be competing 7 months from now. And I think I looked a little thicker than I thought I might. So that's cool. And immediately, this not only gives a physique update and tells me where I'm at, but it also helps me see the flaws in my posing. And they might be relatively subtle. Like, this isn't bad, but there's a few things, like I'm stepping back too far here, for example. And I need to arc in my mid-back just a little more. There, I almost did it. And all of these things make subtle but important differences. Like here, I'm a little too kind of rounded over. I need to keep my chest up so that I maintain the detail while staying wide. And there's little things like that in almost all the poses. Like my foot position there on my side relax is off, and it just continues. But anyway, not a bad place to start, and I'm pretty pleased with it. And this will just be my first of many updates. The next one will come in a couple months, and I'm really looking forward to showing you guys the progress I make. And thank you for following along.